Welcome to my channel. Kindly subscribe and hit the notification bell. Once upon a time, the Okafor family lived in a cramped one-bedroom apartment in the bustling heart of Lagos. The walls were cracked, the ceiling leaked when it rained, and the only source of ventilation was a rusting ceiling fan that groaned more than it worked. Daniel Okafor, a skilled building contractor, had spent the past 2 years searching for work, but the industry had been unkind. With each passing day, hope faded from his eyes, and frustration carved deep lines into his once youthful face. His wife, Amaka, had taken it upon herself to keep the family afloat. Every morning before the sun came up, she walked to the small provisions shop she worked at, where she spent her day attending to customers, earning barely enough to buy food for their 2 young daughters, Chimamanda and Ifeoma. The burden was heavy, but she bore it with grace. Every night, as Daniel sat in silent defeat, she prayed fervently, with a kind of strength even her husband could not understand. One evening, as Daniel returned home after another fruitless day, he found his wife kneeling on the cold cement floor, deep in prayer. His heart ached, not because he lacked faith, but because he felt unworthy of it. He sat beside her, taking her hands in his rough, calloused palms, and whispered, "Amaka, how much longer can we endure this?" She looked at him, her eyes unwavering. "As long as it takes, my love." Daniel spent his days knocking on doors, seeking contracts, calling old contacts who had once praised his work. But times had changed. Those in power now favored younger, more connected contractors. The industry was riddled with corruption, contracts were won not by skill, but by bribes Daniel could not afford. One morning, he visited a former colleague, Mr. Uche, who now ran a thriving construction firm in Victoria Island. Sitting in the man's plush office, Daniel swallowed his pride and pleaded for a chance. "Just one project, Uche. You know my work speaks for itself." Uche sighed and leaned back. "Daniel, I wish I could help, but things are different now. If you want contracts, you need to play the game. You need money to make money." Dejected, Daniel walked out. As he stepped onto the bustling streets, he saw young men his age driving luxury cars, wearing expensive suits. He clenched his fists, swallowing the bitter taste of failure. Back home, he found Amaka cooking their last portion of rice. Their daughters sat on the floor, playing with makeshift toys. The sight of them, so oblivious to the suffering around them, broke him. "Maybe I should take any job I can get, even if it's beneath me," he muttered. Amaka placed a gentle hand on his. "No, Daniel. Our breakthrough will come. God never abandons those who wait." He wanted to believe her. But belief was a heavy thing to carry when reality was this cruel. Amaka intensified her prayers. She fasted, waking up at dawn to kneel at the altar of their small church, whispering Daniel's name over and over again. The church's pastor, a kind-hearted man named Pastor Samuel, noticed her dedication, and one evening pulled her aside. "Sister Amaka, what burdens your heart so much?" She told him everything. The struggles, Daniel's despair, the looming fear of eviction. Pastor Samuel nodded solemnly. "Faith moves mountains, my daughter. Keep praying, and prepare to receive." A week later, Daniel received an unexpected phone call. A major construction company had reviewed his past projects, and wanted him to oversee a high-profile project in Lekki. The deal was worth millions. He could barely believe it. When he told Amaka, she fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "I told you, Daniel. God has remembered us." Daniel, once doubtful, now felt something shift inside him. He had seen failure, and now he was staring at redemption. Within months, the Okafor family transformed. They moved into a spacious home in Lekki, their daughters enrolled in the best schools, and Daniel basked in the luxury of success. They could now eat anything they desired. Jollof rice with grilled chicken replaced their once monotonous meals of gari and groundnut. Amaka, though grateful, remained grounded. One evening, she approached Daniel. "I want to start a business," she said. "I know I don't need to work, but I want to be useful." Daniel frowned. Why would you need to work? You have suffered enough, and now is the time you rest the fruit of your hard work. Now, just relax and take care of our daughters. She nodded, but deep inside, she felt sad and disappointed. The same man who once clung to her for support now saw her as nothing more than a caretaker. Meanwhile, Daniel's nights became longer. He attended business meetings that extended into parties. The once humble man, who had prayed for just one opportunity, was now drowning in excess. And then, Bola entered his life. Daniel sat in his office, staring at the skyline of Lagos from the top floor of his new company headquarters. Success had finally smiled on him, yet something inside him remained restless. The once humble contractor, who had prayed for just a single opportunity, now lived in excess, lavish parties, endless meetings, and extravagant business trips that blurred into one another. It was at one of these high-profile gatherings that he met Bola. She was unlike Amaka, bold, seductive, and wrapped in the kind of confidence that came with knowing exactly what she wanted. Daniel had noticed her from across the room, a sleek black dress hugging her curves, her smile promising something beyond the mundane. That night, his marriage took its first blow. Bola also wanted to have an affair with Daniel because why not? He is rich and thriving, and Daniel was an easy target. She showered him with admiration, telling him he was the kind of man who deserved more than just a simple life. He entertained the flirtation at first, but soon, it became a necessity. The calls, the meetings, the secret rendezvous, Daniel was slipping, and he did not even try to resist. Meanwhile, Amaka noticed the change. Daniel came home later than before, his cologne carried scents she did not recognize, and the warmth that once existed between them faded like an old photograph. She questioned him carefully, always choosing her words, but each time, he dismissed her concerns with a wave of his hand. You worry too much, Amaka. I am just busy building our future. But she knew. Deep down, she knew. Amaka tried to ignore the signs, praying harder than ever, hoping that her husband would see the light. She still cooked his favorite meals, still ensured the house was spotless, still greeted him with a smile even when he barely acknowledged her. But love is a fragile thing when it is not nurtured. One evening, she found a lipstick-stained napkin in the pocket of Daniel's jacket. It was a deep shade of red, one she had never owned. Her heart pounded as she held it, her fingers trembling. Confronting him would be futile, she had seen enough to know he would only dismiss her again. Instead, she turned to Pastor Samuel, seeking solace. What should I do, Pastor? My husband is slipping away, and I don't know how to bring him back. The pastor sighed. Marriage is a journey, my daughter. Some roads are smooth, and some are rough. But a husband must honor his wife, just as Christ honors the church. Do not lose faith, but also, do not allow yourself to be dishonored. That night, Amaka made a decision. If Daniel would not listen to her words, she would let his own actions be his undoing. One night, Daniel walked into their home with Bola by his side. Amaka was setting the dinner table when she heard his voice, followed by a woman's laughter. She turned slowly, her stomach knotting as she saw the woman standing beside her husband, smiling as if she belonged there. Daniel's voice was cold. Amaka, this is Bola. She is moving in. For a moment, everything was silent except for the pounding in Amaka's chest. The betrayal was complete. What are you saying, Daniel? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He shrugged. I am taking a second wife. It's my right as a man. You will have to live with it. Tears threatened to spill, but Amaka held them back. She would not break in front of this woman. And what of our vows? What of our family? Daniel scoffed. You should be grateful. You lived in suffering for years, and now, you have everything. Stop complaining and accept reality. That night, Amaka cried herself to sleep while Bola slept in the same house. A house she had built with her prayers, her sacrifices, and her love. The days that followed were a nightmare. Bola wasted no time making Amaka feel like a stranger in her own home. She took over everything, rearranging the furniture, dismissing the house help Amaka had hired, even choosing what Daniel wore to work. Then came the final blow. Bola accused Amaka of stealing money from Daniel's account. It was a lie, but Daniel, blinded by lust and manipulation, believed her without question. "Leave my house," he said one evening, his voice devoid of any emotion. Amaka's breath hitched. "Daniel, you can't do this. I have nowhere to go. That's not my problem anymore. Take your daughters and leave." It was a cruel eviction, one that stripped Amaka of everything she had built. With no savings and nowhere to turn, she took Chimamanda and Ifeoma and walked out, leaving behind the life she had fought for. She had no home. No money. Only faith. And so, she found herself at the doors of the church, her daughters curled up beside her on the cold floor. Her world had collapsed, but she would not let it break her. Amaka woke up to the sound of early morning hymns echoing through the church hall. The cold floor had stiffened her back, but she ignored the discomfort and turned to check on her daughters. Chimamanda and Ifeoma were still curled up beside her, their small bodies huddled together for warmth. She wiped the dry tears from her face and got up, stretching her aching limbs. The church had become their refuge, the only place where she and her daughters were not turned away. Pastor Samuel had allowed them to sleep in the corner of the church hall for a few nights, but she knew they couldn't stay indefinitely. She needed to find work. After morning prayers, she approached Pastor Samuel. "Papa, I need to work. Anything at all. I can't keep living on charity." The pastor nodded, admiration in his eyes. "Your strength is inspiring, Amaka. The church needs a cleaner. It's not much, but it will help you and your daughters." Amaka clasped her hands together, overwhelmed with gratitude. "Thank you, Pastor. Anything is a blessing." With that, she began her new life, sweeping the church floors, cleaning the pews, and tidying the altar. It was menial, but it was honest work. And as she worked, she prayed, asking God to guide her path. Weeks passed, and Amaka adapted to her new reality. The congregation had grown fond of her, often leaving small gifts, bags of rice, clothes for the girls, even a little money in envelopes. Her daughters resumed their studies in a small community school nearby, and for the first time in a long while, Amaka felt hope. One afternoon, while she was scrubbing the church steps, a man in a neatly pressed agbada approached her. His presence exuded wealth, yet his face held kindness. "Good afternoon, madam. I see you work hard here." She looked up, shielding her eyes from the sun. "Good afternoon, sir. Yes, I do what I can." The man smiled. "My name is Dr. Jide Olumide. I attend service here from time to time. I've seen how dedicated you are. May I ask, what is your story?" Amaka hesitated, but something in his demeanor made her trust him. She told him everything, her marriage, her betrayal, her downfall. Jide listened intently, nodding occasionally, but never interrupting. When she finished, she looked away, ashamed. "You are a remarkable woman," Jide said. "I know resilience when I see it. I run a charity foundation that helps women rebuild their lives. If you are willing, I can offer you a position to help other women like you." Tears welled up in Amaka's eyes. This was more than she had prayed for. Yes, I am willing." Amaka started her new job at Jide's foundation. She was assigned to assist women who had suffered domestic abuse and financial ruin, guiding them towards self-reliance. It was work she understood all too well. She spent her days counseling women, organizing skills training workshops, and distributing food to struggling families. Slowly, she regained confidence in herself. Her daughters also flourished, excelling in school and finding comfort in their mother's renewed strength. Jide observed her work closely, impressed by her compassion and determination. They grew closer, and he found himself drawn to her resilience. He admired how she never spoke bitterly of Daniel, how she focused only on moving forward. One evening, after a successful charity event, Jide approached her. "Amaka, have you thought about remarrying?" She laughed, shaking her head. "Marriage was once my greatest joy. But it also broke me. I don't know if I can trust again." Jide's gaze was steady. "Not all men are like Daniel. Some know the value of a good woman." His words lingered in her mind long after he left. Months passed, and Amaka continued to thrive. She had secured a small apartment near the foundation, finally moving out of the church. It was modest but warm, a place she and her daughters could finally call home. Jide had become a close friend, always offering advice, support, and encouragement. He never pushed, never made her uncomfortable. One evening, after walking her home from a charity event, he finally spoke what had been on his heart for months. "Amaka, I want you to be my wife." She froze, her heart racing. "Jide, I don't know." He took her hands gently. "I won't rush you. But know this, I see you for the strong, beautiful woman you are. And I want to be the man who honors that strength." Tears welled in her eyes, but this time, they were not from sorrow. Could she dare to love again? After weeks of prayer and reflection, Amaka finally gave Jide her answer. "Yes. Yes, I will marry you." Their wedding was a simple yet elegant affair, held at the same church where she had once slept on the floor. The congregation rejoiced, seeing how faith had truly turned her story around. Her daughters now had a father who adored them, and Amaka had found love that was built on respect and partnership. As she stood beside Jide, watching Chimamanda and Ifeoma laughing happily, she knew this was the life she had always deserved. Meanwhile, Daniel's world was crumbling. Daniel sat in his now empty mansion, staring at his phone. His calls to Bola went unanswered. His bank accounts had been drained, his properties sold to cover debts, and the luxurious lifestyle he had built had crumbled overnight. The business deal he had once secured, the one that made him rich, was sabotaged. Bola had forged his signature, taking millions before vanishing without a trace. With creditors at his door and no one left to turn to, he finally faced the weight of his choices. For the first time, he thought of Amaka. The wife who had stood by him when he had nothing. The woman he had cast away like she was worthless. But it was too late. Daniel wandered the streets of Lagos, his once proud stride reduced to a slow, defeated walk. The luxury cars, the grand house, the respect he commanded, all gone. His business empire had crumbled overnight, and he now found himself seeking shelter in dingy guest houses, surviving on the kindness of strangers. He tried reaching out to old friends, but they all turned their backs on him. The same people who had once dined at his table now refused to pick his calls. The only thing left was silence and regret. One evening, he passed by the church where Amaka had once found solace. He hesitated at the entrance, memories of her resilience washing over him. He had once thrown her out with nothing, yet she had found a way to rise again. Could he ever find redemption? Desperation clawed at Daniel as he made inquiries about Amaka's whereabouts. He learned that she had moved out of the church months ago, and was now married to Dr. Jide Olumide. The news struck him harder than any financial loss. She had rebuilt her life, found love again, and was thriving while he was drowning. Driven by a mix of shame and longing, he decided to find her. He needed to see her, even if it was just for a moment. Not for forgiveness, he knew he did not deserve that, but to acknowledge his mistakes. He arrived at the foundation Amaka now managed, watching from a distance, as she spoke to a group of women. She looked radiant, strong, and at peace. The woman he had cast aside had become someone greater than he ever imagined. Unable to face her, he turned away and walked into the night. Days later, Daniel sat outside a local restaurant, his stomach empty, his pride shattered. As he picked at the remnants of a meal someone had discarded, an old acquaintance recognized him. "Daniel. Is this really you?" the man asked, astonished. Embarrassed, Daniel averted his gaze. "Life happened," he muttered. The acquaintance sighed. I heard about Bola. She drained you dry, didn't she? That's what she does. You should have known better. Daniel clenched his fists, but there was no anger left in him, only regret. He thanked the man for a small loan and used it to buy a cheap suit. If he was going to face Amaka, he wanted to at least look like the man she had once loved. Daniel stood outside Amaka's office, his hands trembling. He took a deep breath and knocked. When she opened the door, her eyes widened in shock. "Daniel," she said, her voice steady. "What are you doing here?" His throat tightened. "Amaka, he struggled for words, but none felt adequate. "I just wanted to see you." She studied him, taking in his sunken cheeks, the worn-out suit, the despair in his eyes. "You should leave, Daniel. There's nothing left to say." "Please, Amaka," he pleaded. "I have nothing left. You were right. I lost everything. I just wanted to say I'm sorry." She sighed, folding her arms. "I prayed for you, Daniel. Even after everything you did, I prayed you would find your way. But I have moved on. You should too." Tears welled in his eyes. He nodded. "I won't bother you again. I just needed to see you one last time." She hesitated before stepping aside. "Come in. You look like you need a meal." As Daniel ate, he listened to Amaka talk about her new life. She spoke of Jide, her daughters, her work, and the peace she had found. He realized that even though he had destroyed their marriage, she had refused to be destroyed. "Do you regret it?" she finally asked. "Everything." He nodded slowly. "Every single day." "Then learn from it," she said simply. "Don't waste the chance to be better." For the first time in years, Daniel felt something other than regret, hope. Not for a reconciliation, but for redemption. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late for him to start over. Daniel left Amaka's office that day with a sense of clarity. He had nothing, but he was still alive. And as long as he had breath, he could change his story. He found work at a construction site, starting from the very bottom. The once proud contractor now carried cement and mixed concrete, but he did it without complaint. Every drop of sweat was a lesson, every aching muscle a reminder of his past mistakes. Months passed, and slowly, he rebuilt his reputation. He stayed away from greed, from deceit, from easy money. He lived simply, humbly, grateful for every opportunity. One evening, as he sat in his small rented room, he picked up his phone and sent Amaka a message. "Thank you for feeding me that day. I have nothing to offer but my gratitude. I pray you continue to find happiness." A few minutes later, his phone buzzed with a reply. "I wish you well, Daniel. Keep walking the right path." Daniel woke up before dawn, his body sore from the labor of the previous day. He had found work at a local construction site, carrying bricks, mixing cement, and doing the work of an ordinary laborer. The once celebrated contractor had been reduced to a man trying to survive, but for the first time in years, he felt peace. He no longer sought shortcuts or wealth at the expense of others. Instead, he worked honestly, keeping his head down and his heart focused on making amends, not to Amaka, but to himself. One afternoon, during his break, his supervisor, Mr. Kohler, approached him. "I see you work hard, Daniel. You have experience in this field, don't you?" Daniel wiped the sweat from his forehead. "Yes, I used to be a contractor. But life humbled me." Mr. Kohler nodded. "Well, we need someone who understands structure, not just labor. A site supervisor position is open. Think about it." Daniel's heart pounded. This was an opportunity to rise again, not in arrogance, but in diligence. After a night of reflection, Daniel accepted the offer. He stepped into the new role with caution, remembering his past mistakes. He treated the workers with respect, earning their admiration. Unlike before, when wealth had blinded him, he now saw the true value of honest labor. With his increased earnings, he rented a modest apartment, nothing luxurious, just a place to lay his head without shame. For the first time in years, he didn't crave excess, he only wanted stability. One evening, as he walked home, he passed by a group of young men boasting about money, women, and power. He saw himself in them, the version of himself that had lost everything. He whispered a silent prayer for them, hoping they would not have to learn the hard way. Weeks passed, and Daniel's life continued on its new path. One afternoon, as he was inspecting a building site, he heard a familiar voice. "Daniel? Is that you?" He turned to see Uche, an old business associate who had once envied his success. Uche's eyes widened, taking in Daniel's dusty work boots and simple attire. "I heard what happened to you," Uche said. "Man, life is unpredictable. Who would have thought?" Daniel only nodded. "Yes, it is. But sometimes, life has to break you to build you back stronger." Uche smirked. "Well, if you ever want to get back into the big leagues, let me know. I still have some connections." Daniel smiled politely. "I appreciate it, Uche, but I'm right where I need to be." For the first time, he realized that success wasn't about wealth, it was about peace. One Sunday, Daniel felt a pull toward the church, where he had once sought solace. He entered hesitantly, finding a seat at the back. The choir's voices filled the space with warmth, and for a brief moment, he felt whole again. As the service ended, he spotted Amaka in the distance. She was surrounded by well-wishers, her daughters holding onto her hands. She looked happy, radiant, complete. Jide walked up to her, placing a protective arm around her shoulders. The sight didn't hurt Daniel as he had once feared, it brought him peace. Amaka's eyes met his briefly. There was no resentment, no anger, only quiet understanding. She gave him a small nod before turning back to her family. That was all he needed. As Daniel left the church, he felt lighter than he had in years. The past no longer defined him. He had lost everything, yet he had gained something even greater: wisdom, humility, and the strength to move forward. That evening, he sat in his small apartment, looking out at the city that had once been his kingdom. He had no riches, no mansion, no luxury cars. But he had something more valuable: peace. And for the first time in his life, Daniel was truly free. Daniel's days became structured, filled with purpose. He had rebuilt his life, not with riches, but with integrity. Every morning, he arrived at the construction site early, ensuring everything ran smoothly. The younger workers often came to him for advice, and he found himself mentoring them, sharing his story in the hopes they would not repeat his mistakes. One afternoon, a young man named Toby approached him hesitantly. "Sir, can I talk to you?" Daniel nodded, setting his tools aside. "Of course, Toby. What's on your mind?" Toby shuffled nervously. "I've been tempted to take shortcuts, accept bribes, cut corners. Some of my friends are making fast money, and I feel like I'm wasting my time here." Daniel studied him carefully. "I understand that temptation. I lived it. And I lost everything because of it. The real waste isn't working hard, it's chasing quick money that disappears just as fast. Trust me, Toby, wealth without wisdom is a trap." Toby exhaled and nodded. "Thank you, sir. I needed to hear that." Daniel smiled. If his suffering could help someone else avoid the same fate, then perhaps it had not been in vain. Months passed, and Daniel's reputation as a reliable and skilled supervisor grew. One day, the company's director, Mr. Adeyemi, visited the site for an inspection. After watching Daniel for a while, he approached him. "Daniel, I've heard a lot about you. Your dedication, your work ethic, men like you are rare." Daniel stood straight, unsure of what to say. "Thank you, sir. I just do my best." Mr. Adeyemi smiled. "I have a project coming up, something bigger than this. It needs a steady hand, someone who understands both construction and leadership. I want you to oversee it." Daniel's heart pounded. This was the kind of opportunity he had lost long ago. But this time, he would approach it differently. "I would be honored, sir." "Good. Come by my office tomorrow, and we'll discuss the details." As Mr. Adeyemi walked away, Daniel allowed himself a small smile. This time, he wouldn't let success change him. One evening, as Daniel walked home, he passed a familiar figure sitting on the roadside. The woman looked frail, her once proud posture hunched, her fine clothes now tattered. It was Bola. He stopped, staring in shock. "Bola?" She looked up, and for a moment, recognition flickered in her eyes before shame took over. "Daniel." He hesitated before sitting beside her. "What happened to you?" She let out a hollow laugh. "The same thing that happened to you. I chased money, and when it ran out, so did everyone around me." Daniel sighed. "We made mistakes, Bola. But it's never too late to rebuild." She scoffed. "Not everyone gets a second chance." He pulled out a small amount of money and placed it in her hands. "Then make this one count." She stared at the money, then at him. "Why would you help me? After everything?" Daniel stood. "Because I know what it's like to have no one." He walked away, not knowing if she would use the money wisely, but hoping she would. The new project Daniel was assigned to was near the same neighborhood where he and Amaka had once lived. Every day, he passed by the places that held his memories, the small apartment where they had struggled, the market where Amaka had worked tirelessly, the church where she had prayed for him. One evening, he decided to visit Pastor Samuel. The pastor welcomed him with a warm smile. "Daniel, it's good to see you." Daniel bowed his head. "Pastor, I've made so many mistakes. But I've been trying to make things right." Pastor Samuel nodded. "And that is what matters. You cannot erase the past, but you can shape the future." They prayed together, and for the first time in a long while, Daniel felt a deep sense of peace. Daniel poured himself into his work, ensuring the project was a success. His leadership was firm yet fair, and the workers respected him. Toby, the young man he had mentored, thrived under his guidance. One evening, after inspecting the site, Toby approached him again. "Sir, I got an offer for a better position. But I wanted to thank you first. You changed my life." Daniel clapped a hand on his shoulder. "I'm proud of you, Toby. Always remember, integrity will take you further than shortcuts ever will." As Toby walked away, Daniel realized how much had changed. He had once been the one seeking guidance, and now he was giving it. Maybe, just maybe, he had found his true purpose after all. As Daniel sat in his modest apartment, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. Gone were the days of reckless spending and selfish ambition. Now, his wealth came in the form of lessons learned, respect earned, and the quiet satisfaction of honest work. The construction project he had been supervising was nearing completion, and with it, a sense of fulfillment filled his heart. He no longer chased money or status, he chased purpose. And for the first time, he felt rich in a way that money could never provide. One evening, as he walked home, he received a call from Mr. Adeyemi. "Daniel, I'd like to see you in my office tomorrow. There's something important we need to discuss." A tinge of curiosity flickered through him, but he agreed. Whatever was ahead, he was ready. The next morning, Daniel arrived at Mr. Adeyemi's office, his heart steady. The older man studied him for a moment before smiling. "Daniel, you have proven yourself to be more than just a worker, you are a leader. I want to offer you a permanent position as a senior project manager. The pay is good, but more importantly, you will have the opportunity to train and mentor young men in this field." Daniel's breath hitched. A year ago, he would have jumped at the salary alone. But now, what moved him most was the opportunity to give back. To prevent others from making the same mistakes he had. He met Mr. Adeyemi's gaze and nodded. "I accept, sir. And I promise to give it my best." Days after starting his new role, Daniel received a visitor at the construction site. It was Bola. Her once flashy appearance had been replaced by something simpler, humbler. She hesitated before speaking. Daniel, I wanted to thank you for that day when you helped me. He studied her carefully, noting the sincerity in her voice. I hope you found your way, Bola. She sighed. I'm trying. I work at a small shop now, just enough to get by. It's not the life I once had, but it's honest. And that means something. Daniel nodded. That's all that matters. She smiled sadly. I hope you find happiness, Daniel. I already have, he replied. And for the first time, he truly meant it. As the months passed, Daniel found himself drawn toward a new dream, rebuilding his relationship with his daughters. He had spent too long lost in his own world, but now, he wanted to be the father they deserved. One Sunday, he stood outside Amaka's home, nervous but determined. When she opened the door, she looked at him for a long moment before stepping aside. Come in, Daniel. Chimamanda and Ifeoma were hesitant at first, but time softened the distance between them. He didn't expect forgiveness overnight, but he was willing to prove, through actions, that he was a changed man. Before leaving, Amaka spoke quietly. Keep showing up, Daniel. That's all they need from you now. He nodded, swallowing back emotion. He would. A year later, Daniel stood on the grounds of a completed project, the largest one he had ever overseen. But more than the work, it was the people he had helped along the way that made this moment special. Toby, now a rising star in construction, stood beside him. You've changed a lot of lives, sir. Daniel smiled. Including my own. That evening, as he returned home, he found a message from Amaka. The girls would like to see you this weekend. Tears welled in his eyes. He had lost so much, but he had gained something far greater: redemption. He had risen from the ashes, not as the man he once was, but as the man he was always meant to be. Thanks for watching. Do not forget to like, subscribe and share to your friends and loved ones.